You are listening to audio recorded at the Village Church. For more information, go to villagechurchbaltimore.com.
In the 2009 movie, Up in the Air, George Clooney's character and Anna Kendrick's character, they're having this conversation about marriage. And Clooney decides that he doesn't ever want to get married, and Kendrick is shocked. She's flabbergasted. She's asking him why, and he says there's no value to marriage, and he just says, sell it to me. Sell me marriage. And Kendrick goes, okay, how about love? And Clooney laughs, and then she goes, okay, stability, just someone you can count on. And Clooney responds, how many stable marriages do you know? And Kendrick, she's looking for some reason to convince him to get married, and she goes, maybe somebody to talk to, somebody to spend your life with. And Clooney replies, I'm surrounded by people that I talk to. I doubt that's going to change. And then Kendrick says, how about just not dying alone? And Clooney goes, starting when I was 12, we moved each one of my grandparents into a nursing facility. My parents went the same way. Make no mistake, we all die alone. In this movie, George Clooney's character is reflective, I think, of a growing trend in our culture, which is this trend of refusing to get married. To many people, it's just not worth the trouble. The benefits don't outweigh the costs. There's too much heartache, too much pain, too much frustration, and all for what? There's not much to gain from it all. In our culture, it used to be that one of the life goals for most people was to get married. And I'm not making a judgment call whether that's a good or bad thing. That's just what it used to be. But somewhere along the line, that changed. And you see this in our demographics. In 1960, when you look at people in the U.S. between ages 18 and 64, the prime marriage population, in 1960, 76% of that population was married. And now, at least in 2016, the most recent study that I could find, only 49% of that same population was married. In other words, if you were to run into a random person, a random American, between ages 18 and 64, that person is more likely to be single, to be unmarried, than to be married. And you might think, oh, maybe it's because it's the rising rate of divorce, but actually, fun fact, the rate of divorce since the 80s has slightly been decreasing. And the main reason, I think, is that many people are actually choosing not to get married at all. In fact, in 2010, 10 years ago, a Pew Research survey revealed that 39% of Americans believed, or they agreed with this statement, that the institution of marriage has become obsolete. 39% believe that marriage has now become obsolete, even though some of them are getting married themselves. So if people aren't getting married, then what are they doing instead? Well, some people, like George Clooney's character in this movie, they're perfectly content with just living life and not having, strong, committed relationships. Other people, maybe they choose to have some of these long-term relationships, but they're not committed enough to be 100% committed to be married. It's always at this distance. And still others, maybe they don't want any sort of commitment at all. They don't want to be in any relationship, so they just resort to keeping everybody as friends, platonic friends, and maybe they might have some one-night stands here and there if they need to have a fix or something, but that's what they do. And still others, maybe they do have a desire to get married. Maybe it's even a very strong desire, but for some reason or another, they haven't been able to find someone to meet their criteria to get married to. And I'm speaking in broad strokes, of course, but I think this trend, this national trend, and I think this is a global trend in developed countries of people not wanting to get married, is having a significant effect on our culture in a variety of ways. But one of those is that many people, they have this inherent need for intimacy, and now they are no longer fulfilling that need. Regardless of whether people are single or married, most people have this inherent need for intimacy. They want connection and love and closeness and friendship and camaraderie and partnership. And of course, marriage doesn't have to be the only thing to fill that need, but for much of history, that was one of the main things that people looked to fill that need. But as fewer and fewer people are getting married, I think more and more people are having this intimacy problem. But Clooney's critique, I think, is valid. His belief is that there is no guarantee that marriage will solve this problem. You could get married and you might not solve your intimacy problem. And for many people, it has turned out to be the case that marriage doesn't deliver what it offers. To many people, marriage is obsolete, so why bother? Today, we're wrapping up our sermon series titled The Needs of the Heart. We've been going through the wisdom books, and today we're talking about Song of Songs and the need for intimacy. Over the past several weeks, we've been talking about how all of these different books, they reveal within us different needs that we have. And in the book of the Song of Songs, they reveal within us, I think, the need for intimacy. And in my opinion, the Song of Songs is one of the most mind-boggling books of the Bible. There really isn't anything like it. And for one, God is almost never mentioned in the whole book. There's one instance where he's mentioned sort of as a passing expression, but that's it. For another, the whole structure is very odd. It reads a bit like Romeo and Juliet, where you have two lovers just having a dialogue, a poetic dialogue with one another, and sometimes a few random people, they chime in. And lastly, there's a lot of graphic imagery in this book. And I mean that in two different ways when I say graphic imagery. First off, I mean that it's very visual. There's a lot of very interesting word pictures that when we try to imagine, they don't really make sense. For example, in a Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 2, one of my favorites, it goes, "Your navel," or your belly button, "is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies." And I don't know about you, maybe you, I don't really understand it, but maybe you do. Maybe you'll try it as a pickup line sometime and see how it goes. But there are a lot of these things in Song of Songs. There are these word pictures. Teeth are compared to sheep, and necks are compared to towers, and so on. And it might be kind of strange to picture this, but I think the goal is not, you're not supposed to imagine what it would look like if your mouth was full of sheep or something like that. I think what these word images are supposed to reveal to us is what sheep represents. And so there's a lot of cultural context to dig through in order to understand some of these passages. But there's another thing I mean when I mean that it's graphic. I mean that it is very sensual at times. And sort of a warning, if you're not aware already, Song of Songs has a lot of stuff talking about sexual intimacy. So I'll be venturing into some of these topics. So if you have kids and you don't want them to be tuning in, that's my warning, okay? Anyways, keep going. So there are these scenes that we read about in Song of Songs in which if we were to display them in a movie, these would sort of be the scenes that, they would make the movie a PG-13 movie, right? And so these are the scenes that are in this book. And if you haven't read the Bible much, and you've always just thought the Bible was kind of a boring book, a book of rules or something like that, I encourage you to read the Song of Songs. You might be surprised. So a question that you might be wondering is, why then is this book in the Bible? Why do we have something like this? A book that doesn't talk about God very much, a book that just seems to be like a bunch of, love dialogues, and it has sensual imagery. Some people, in response to this question, because it is so strange, they're quick to jump to allegorizing the book, and they're quick to say, oh, this book is about the relationship that God has with Israel, or the relationship that Christ has with his church. And I think that's true to some extent, and they sort of dismiss this whole book as one big parable. But I think when you do that, you dismiss a lot of the nuances in this book, because then there are some questions then. Why is this parable so long? Why is it so repetitive? And why does it get into so much detail about all of these characters and what they're doing? All these details about these body features, and the sensual acts and so on. I think sometimes we try so hard to spiritualize things that we neglect what is on the surface, the plain meaning on the surface. We try so hard to read meanings into the text that we miss what the text is plainly talking about. And I think, simply put, the Song of Songs primarily is about two people who love each other, and they are poetically verbalizing to one another the joy they have in one another as they participate in this human love and sexuality. So I think instead of jumping to, I think there has to be a deeper meaning to this. I think the first thing we should do is pause and just think, wow, God must have thought that human sex was so important that he put a whole book in the Bible that was solely dedicated to this topic. And I think that is worth chewing on, that sex and marriage is such an important, pivotal part of the human experience, of our spiritual life, that God put a whole book in the Bible just to talk about that. Here's what I think. The reason why many people don't want to get married is because their understanding of marriage is so different from God's understanding of marriage. I mean, of course, there's some people, they don't want to get married and that's just their thing. But I think there's a large group of people who maybe at one point in time, they entertained the idea of getting married. Maybe they thought about the idea of getting married, but then they concluded marriage wasn't for them. And I think the reason why is because their whole lives, they've witnessed all sorts of marriages that didn't line up to their standard. It didn't line up to their ideal of marriage. Maybe these marriages were characterized by deception or monotony or infidelity or frustration. Maybe it was their parents, maybe it was their friends. Whoever it was, they reached a point in their life and they realized, I don't want that for myself. I don't want that. But I think it's not that they don't want marriage, it's that they don't want a bad kind of marriage. And it's just that the bad kind of marriage is all they know. All they've seen are knockoff versions of marriage the way God designed. It's kind of like a guy who says, imagine this, a guy might say, I don't like Mexican food. Every time I eat Mexican food, I just feel sick in the stomach. I don't like it. And you go, oh, have you been to Mexican restaurants before? And they go, yeah, Taco Bell. Taco Bell's, I've been there at least 3 or 4 times. I'm not a fan. I get their Crunchwrap Supreme. I get their Gorditas. Not a fan. And now you realize, hearing that, you know what the issue is. The issue is not that they don't like Mexican food. It's that they don't like Taco Bell, which is pretending to be Mexican food, and it's not. Real Mexican restaurants don't use words like supreme and crunch in their menus, okay? So I'm not, knocking Taco Bell. That's just how Taco Bell is. I actually ate Taco Bell a week or 2 ago. My point is, you can't try Taco Bell and conclude that you're an expert on Mexican food. And in the same way, if all you've seen are horrible marriages, I don't think you should throw marriage out the window. Deep down inside, there's probably a part of you that wants marriage, that wants intimacy, that wants love. The issue is that you haven't experienced it yet. And I think the Song of Songs, it depicts in many ways what the ideal marriage should look like. It gives us this picture, this story, this poem of what true intimacy looks like. And I think throughout the book, like it is with a lot of these other poetry books that we've been talking about, God is trying to awaken these desires within us, to try to show us, these desires you have for these idealized things. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to give those things up. These things are real. These passions and desires, I've given you for a reason. These desires for connection and passion and oneness, for intimacy, I've given those things to you. And so here's this book, read it, and allow those passions, those desires to awaken once more. So what does this God-designed intimacy look like? This book has a lot of different things to talk about. I'll just select 4 different aspects that I think I want to highlight. 4 different aspects of intimacy that the author of Song of Songs highlights. And the first is this aspect of single-mindedness. True intimacy requires single-mindedness. Check out Song of Songs 3:1-4. And by the way, notice how many times this woman, she's using this phrase, him whom my soul loves, okay? I'll read this. On my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me. So here's the sense of single-mindedness, the sense of nothing else matters. I don't care about anything else. I don't need to do anything else until I find him whom my soul loves. Toddlers are pretty good at being single-minded. If you've ever hung out with a toddler very much, that's all they do. When they are at a store and they find a toy they want to buy, that's all they care about. That's all they think about. That's all they talk about. Their minds are singularly focused on that toy. Or if they want to watch TV, but it's time for dinner and they're upset, that's all they're thinking about. They want to watch TV. Their minds are singularly focused on that desire. But as we grow older, what happens naturally is we mature and we sort of develop this ability to divide up our minds to focus on different things at different times. We learn to let certain things go, and we learn to not try as hard if we can't get the things we want. And that's part of growing up. And I think what often comes as a result as we lose our sense of single-mindedness. Now, single-mindedness, I think, can be good in some regards, it can be bad in some regards, but I think here in the area of marital intimacy, it is a positive thing. It is a good thing. In fact, I think one of the reasons why so many of our marriages lack intimacy is because we've lost this aspect of single-mindedness. We've become so distracted by other people, other responsibilities, other hobbies, and marriage just doesn't become a priority anymore. And it's not just that it's not a priority, it's become one of a bunch of different things to do. It's just like a big laundry list that we have, and marriage is just one of those things. So we've lost that single-mindedness. That's the first aspect I want to point out, single-mindedness. Here's another one, movement. Movement. In Song of Songs 2:10, the woman says, my beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. So there's a sense of, let's leave this all behind. Let's go somewhere. Let's forget everything else. Let's run away together. You know, I think about that Goo Goo Dolls song, Slide, right? Where he goes, do you want to get married or run away? And I think that's what this picture is of, right? Let's go somewhere. And here's another example, Song of Songs 4:16, the second half, going into the beginning of chapter 5. Let my beloved, this is the woman talking, let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. And here's a man's response. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. This is not literally his sister. This is just how they talked back then, okay? I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk. Now, there are a few things going on. The first thing is that you can see the woman is inviting the man to her, right? They're not just stagnant people sitting around. She is inviting him to come to her, and they're talking about gardens and fruits, and they're not having a picnic, okay? This is metaphorical language for intimacy, okay? Physical intimacy. And I think this is interesting because, sometimes in socially conservative Christian circles, we have this sort of unspoken that the guy needs to be the person who makes the first moves. But we see clearly here, the woman is making the first move, right? She is inviting this guy to eat its choicest fruits. Anyways, just take that as you will, okay? The second thing I want to point out is this intimacy involves the sense of invitation and foreplay. This back and forth call and response dynamic. It's almost childlike. Like let's play and let's try this. That was fun. Let's move on to the next thing. That sort of component. And I do think that true Christian marital intimacy is built on two people. They just really enjoy being with one another. They really enjoy getting to know one another, and they're just really, really good friends. They want to try new things together. They want to learn from one another. They want to grow together. And I think there's movement to it. There's this dynamic nature to it. It's not, unfortunately, in many marriages today, we've lost that dynamic. It's dry sometimes, it's monotonous sometimes, it's predictable sometimes. We just go through the motions, and there's no intimacy. And if that's you, I don't know if you relate to any of that. If you are in a marriage relationship where you feel like it's dry and monotonous, you've lost movement, I just invite you to pray. Just start by praying and asking God to awaken the love in your marriage. So we have the single-mindedness of intimacy, this movement of intimacy. Here's another one, the peculiarity of intimacy, the peculiarity of intimacy. Song of Songs 2:2 says, as a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. So this guy, he's talking about how his love stands out from all the rest, right? He's looking at everyone in the world, and he's like, y'all are a bunch of brambles, a bunch of tumbleweed, a bunch of thorns, but my lover is like a lily, totally unique and set apart from the rest. I think that's beautiful. Some people, the way they date women or the way they think about women is similar to the way cats catch mice. Okay, you know how cats catch mice, right? They love catching mice, they love to chase, but once they catch the mice, they don't really care anymore. They don't really know what to do with it. And I think in the same way, some guys, maybe some girls too, but from my experience, it's often a guy thing. The guys, they love the chase, and they win a girl over, and once they win the girl over, the excitement is gone. The chase is done. And so they want to rekindle this sort of excitement, and so they try to find someone else. And they realize it's not so much that they want to be with a specific girl, they just like the idea of chasing a girl, right? And I think one of the ways to prevent that sort of mentality is to see your significant other as a lily among brambles. To see your significant other as peculiar and unique, to have a peculiar relationship. And what I mean by that is build a foundation and get to know one another, have inside jokes and have shared experiences and have fond memories. And the more you do that, the more you actually start to get intimate with one another. The more you do that, the more you develop your relationship and you actually make it your own. And the more your significant other will be more beautiful than the rest. You know, oftentimes the way people think about beauty is they think about beauty as a universal standard, right? And I mean, there's pros and cons to this. There's some research behind this, but I won't get into all of it. But basically, some people, they have this idea, they might not say it like this, but essentially they think this way, that you can sort of rank the whole world. If you were to put everybody on the spectrum, you can sort of rank them on a beauty spectrum. There's this one universal standard, and everyone sort of falls on the spectrum. And your goal, if you're trying to get married to someone, is to find someone who is high up on this list, right? But the problem with that view is that people peak. And what I mean, like, at some point in time, people, if you believe in the spectrum of beauty, okay, at some point in time, people start falling down in the ranks because of old age, of wrinkles, things like that, okay? Most people, they hit a point in their life when their universal beauty ranking starts to go down. And so what do then? Does that mean you just settle for someone less than? Do you just find a new spouse? So that's a predicament, right? And I think that's why that model doesn't work. I don't think that's how beauty works. Beauty works like this. In a true intimate relationship, this is how beauty works, okay? You marry somebody, and as you get to know that person, and as your relationship develops its own unique and peculiar way, you start to find that person more and more beautiful over time. And in this type of marital intimacy, in your eyes, your spouse's beauty grows with age. So to put it another way, it's not that you have a standard of beauty and you need to find someone to match that standard of beauty. Rather, first you find somebody, and then your standard of beauty adjusts and changes to fit the person that you found. And I think that's the peculiarity of intimacy. Your relationship grows and develops and is unique by itself, so that because you're in it and you're experiencing it, you have no more need to look elsewhere. So there's this single-mindedness, this movement, this peculiarity of intimacy. There's one more aspect I want to talk about, the commitment of intimacy. The commitment of intimacy. One of my favorite verses in this book is 8:6, Song of Songs 8:6. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy as fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. That's one reference to God. So we don't really use seals anymore in today's culture. I mean, maybe some people do, but most of us, we don't. But back then, seals were these official things that important people used to guarantee security or to demonstrate ownership, things like that. And so this language of set me as a seal upon your heart or as a seal on your arm is similar to us saying today, belong to me, be committed to me, right? In a very poetic way. And notice there's a metaphorical seal on the heart and a seal on the arm. What is that supposed to mean? I think this is conveying that this commitment is both private and public, right? It's on the heart, and that's a private thing. Be sincerely committed. Don't just do it, for show. Be actually committed on the inside, but it's also public. It's also on your arm. It's kind of like wearing a ring. Make sure everybody knows it too. And then there's this language of death in this grave, and I think what this is about is letting us know this is not just a temporary fling. This is not just a one-night stand. This is for life. You're doing this. You're committed to this person till death do us part, right? Choosing to experience true Christian intimacy is a huge decision. And I think biblical intimacy, the way it's constructed is you can't be wishy-washy about it. You have to be all in for life. That's the picture it gives us. Tim Keller writes in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, the Bible says, don't unite with someone physically unless you are also willing to unite with the person emotionally, personally, socially, economically, and legally. Don't become physically naked and vulnerable to the other person without becoming vulnerable in every other way, because you have given up your freedom and bound yourself in marriage. Indeed, sex is perhaps the most powerful God-created way to help you give your entire self to another human being. Sex is God's appointed way for two people to reciprocally say to one another, I belong completely, permanently, and exclusively to you. You must not use sex to say anything less. Unfortunately, many people, and maybe some of us, we have used sex to say things that are less than that. And I think one of the dangers behind sex outside of marriage, outside of this radical commitment that Tim Keller's talking about, is that it removes this commitment component, this commitment aspect of sex. God designed the act of sex in such a way so that it was meant to strengthen the bond between the two people participating in sex together. That's what sex is meant to do. When you have sex, you want to say lavish things like, I always love you, and you feel committed to that person, you feel bonded to that person. But if you are engaging in sex and you are not willing to bond yourself to that person, then that act of sex will cause a lot of confusion and pain. It's trite, but oftentimes, people say that when you have sexual intimacy with someone, it's like you give that person a piece of your heart. And I think that's true. And once you do give that person a piece of your heart, it's really hard to take it back. Unfortunately, we live in this culture where the norm is to sleep with people before you get married to them, and to sleep with many people before you choose one of them to get married to. People often wonder, how would you know if you're sexually compatible with someone unless you first sleep with them first? Or how would you know what you're even looking for in a marriage? How would you even know if you're sexually compatible with this person unless you've had sex with other people too, to even know what you like, what you don't like, and that sort of thing? But I think this type of thinking misses the point. I think this type of thinking views sex primarily as a self-expression act, or a self-discovery act, or self-pleasure act, but I don't think that's how sex was originally designed. Sex is a communal act. Sex is a self-sacrifice, self-giving act. It's about giving yourself and pledging yourself and committing yourself to another person. And so I think having sex with a lot of people before you reach a place where you're able to get married, I think is self-defeating. And at this point, I want to say a quick word for all of you single and dating folks. Song of Songs 4:13 says, a garden locked is my sister, my bride, a spring locked, a fountain sealed. Before marriage, this female character in this book is described as a locked garden, as a sealed fountain. And I think this is imagery of this person is something beautiful that hasn't been discovered yet, that hasn't been known or known yet. And I think that's God's ideal. The hope is that before you get married, you are like the secret garden, the secret fountain. You have these beautiful, amazing, glorious aspects about yourself that no one yet knows. That you're saving for the person you want to commit to. And once you commit to that person, then you let it all loose. And I mean that in both the physical sense and the emotional sense. As much as you're able to, if you're not married yet, I encourage you to save the best parts of yourself, whether it is your physical affection or whether it's your emotional vulnerability. Save the best parts of yourself for that person that you want to commit to eventually. So that's God's ideal for what intimacy looks like, right? It involves a single-mindedness, this peculiarity, this commitment, and so on. But maybe you're sitting here and you just feel that maybe this is out of your reach. Maybe it's out of your reach because of things that have already happened in your life, or maybe it's out of reach because it's this ideal that just seems like it's this impossible standard to hit. Maybe you're in a marriage, but your marriage looks nothing like what we were talking about right now. Or maybe you were married before and it didn't work out for you. Or maybe you've never been married, but you've lost your virginity already. Or maybe it was taken away from you. Maybe you've been waiting a long time to get married, but it's just never come. And part of you is just, you feel like giving up on in hopes that you ever will get married. Maybe you've gone through various experiences that have caused you to feel all sorts of negative emotions when it comes to marital intimacy. Maybe you feel ashamed or hurt or deceived or unworthy or calloused. But whatever disappointments or frustrations or feelings of futility you may feel, know this, that you are not alone. The most ironic thing, I think, about the Song of Songs is that Solomon perhaps committed more sexual sin than anybody else in the Bible. We don't know for sure if Solomon wrote this book. Many scholars think he wrote it, or some scholars, they suspect that maybe someone else during his time wrote it and dedicated to him. But regardless, he appears multiple occasions in this book. And it hints at this one occasion. But elsewhere in the Bible, we learn that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Okay, that was Solomon's life. And so this story, this imagery that we read about in this book, is clearly not reflective of Solomon's life. It's kind of interesting, even today, some of the best love songs that we have in our world of music are written by people who have pretty messed up love lives. It's the same kind of dynamic, right? But whoever the writer is, I don't think, here's the point. Whoever the writer is, I don't think he's trying to say, look at my love life. It's awesome. It's amazing. Try to be like me. I don't think that's the point. I think what's going on is he's intentionally painting this ideal, this standard that makes us go, that is what I want, but that is what I can't achieve on my own. He's giving us this aching, this longing deep in our souls, in which we're saying, how I wish I could have this kind of intimacy. I think that's what the author's trying to do. And I think when we get there, that is when we encounter God. Because later in the Bible, we read about God's love for us. And throughout the Bible, we often see this metaphor about how God is a groom and Israel is a bride, and how Christ is a groom and the church is his bride. And we read about how Jesus left his Father in heaven and united with us to become one flesh with us, literally becoming a human being, having solidarity with us through his life and death. And now we have been bought by the price of his blood, and now we belong to him. This intimacy that we long for is ultimately found in Jesus. You see, it was Jesus who embodied this, like the single-mindedness of intimacy. He knew that intimacy with us required him to have this laser-focused vision, this path to walk to the cross. So he set his mind to it. He ran that race all the way to death. It was Jesus, who had this impulsiveness, this heart, this connectedness to heal, this movement to heal the sick and feed the hungry. It was Jesus who embodied this wanting to always be on the move and always care for people, always healing the sick and feeding the hungry and calming the storms. Jesus was all about that. It was Jesus who embodied the peculiarity of intimacy. One of the most common fears I think many people have in marriage is, what if the person that I'm with loses interest and moves on and finds someone's better? But not Jesus. Jesus, he knows you by name, and he chose you before the dawn of time. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He says he knows us like a shepherd knows his sheep. And if you ever go astray, he'll seek you down, and he'll find you and bring you back. And no one can snatch you out of his hands. It's Jesus who embodied this commitment that we're talking about of intimacy. As he said in John 13, there's no greater love than a person lays down his life for his friends, and that's what he did for us. We, once enemies, were brought into the fold and made friends because he died for us. And he didn't just set a seal on his heart and on his arm. He set nails on his hands and his feet. And that was the physical sign of his commitment to us. Earthly marriage is sort of like a movie trailer. A movie trailer, its goal is to point you to the movie. And whether you're in an earthly marriage or not, whether you will be in a marriage or not, know that there's a reason why it doesn't seem to match the ideal, because it's not the main thing. You don't watch a movie trailer and go, man, that wasn't that great of a movie. Because the movie trailer's purpose is not to be a movie. It's to point you to the movie. In the same way, marriage was never meant to be an end-all, be-all. It was just a trailer to the movie, and the movie is Jesus. So everything you're looking for in marriage, whether you're looking for intensity, looking for security, looking for joy, everything is ultimately found in Christ. Regardless of where you are on this marriage spectrum, regardless of where you are of your in your past experiences, I invite you to come to Jesus. Hold on to him and don't let go, because he's holding on to you. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for Jesus and how Jesus, he is holding on to us and he hasn't let go yet. And he has said that there's nothing in the world that can separate us from his love. We thank you so much that he came, he lived among us, he suffered with us, he died with us, and he rose again. So that whatever we are feeling, whatever amounts of loneliness we have, or pain or frustration we have, or feelings of betrayal, whatever we have, we can trust in Jesus. We know that he has experienced what we are going through, and he loves us still. God, we do pray for some of our marriages, though. Some of us are in marriages that just aren't doing well, and if I'm honest with myself, I know there are plenty of ways my own marriage can be growing. So I want to pray for my marriage, and on behalf of anybody else who's tuning in, their marriages, that maybe they've taken a beating during this pandemic. Maybe they've gotten cold or callous or stagnant, or there's just more opportunities for arguments. God, I want to pray that you would invade and penetrate our hearts. Help us to recover some of this love, some of this joy, some of this intimacy that you're talking about in the Song of Songs. Help us to love the way you love us. Help us to give the way you give to us. Help us to commit the way you commit to us. Help us to be the husband you call, or the wife that you called us to be. But at the end of the day, help us to trust in you. No matter our circumstance, help us to prioritize you, to love you first, and to know that it is in your love that we find true love. It is in the intimacy that we have with Christ that we find true intimacy. Thank you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.